Welcome, everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is the 97th meeting we've had consecutively. Thank you all for joining us, everyone who's been participating over the 97 weeks and the new people who are joining us today. We created this forum 97 weeks ago in order to bring together people from all over the world to discuss how we can create true peace. And doesn't matter what ideology you're from, if you are from this perspective, you want to actually create true peace, then you are welcome here. We've had roughly 95 nations represented that we're aware of who have participated. And as well, we've had at least 1,000 people who participate weekly on these live discussions. So that's a very wonderful accomplishment, and we'd like to keep growing. So if you're watching from YouTube or any other broadcasting place, please share this out with your friends, your organizations, and get them participating as well. So to start us off today, oh, no, I should introduce myself. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed. To start us off today for the discussion, I'd like to have Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead, Helga.
Yes, let me say hello to all of you. Well, I think everybody is acutely aware that the world is in an unprecedented turmoil. And added to the many crises we have been discussing in the last 97 weeks, comes now the new big shock, and that is that President Trump declared first high tariffs against practically the whole world. Then, there was a retaliation, especially by China. Then Trump accelerated against China again. And now basically the US has import tariffs against China of 145% and China of 125% against the United States. In days, trillions of dollars were wiped off the books in the financial markets. And it was probably due to that some of the billionaire friends of President Trump convinced him to make a 90-day pause for the rest of the world except China. Now, obviously, one can debate what is the intention of President Trump. He says the United States was looted by the whole world. Everybody took advantage of the United States, and he wants to reindustrialize the United States. Now, that may be his honest intention. However, if you ask around the world, I think almost nobody would agree with that interpretation, because, we know that the IMF World Bank system was what pretty much created trade conditions to the advantage of, one can say, especially the United States, but also Europe, to the disadvantage of the developing countries, that the IMF conditionalities actually prevented industrial development of the global south. And that's why we have this rebellion as it is expressed in the formation of the BRICS and other such developments. So what will be the result now? Well, we will see what happens, but we are potentially, with this looming or escalating trade war between the United States and China, this is not causing the financial crisis, or it's not causing the systematic crisis of the financial system, but it could trigger a final collapse of the entire system, because that system has been bankrupt for a very long time. And we are circulating right now internationally on the Schiller site and Schiller Institute website and other places, a statement which I would ask all participants in this call to help us to distribute, with the headline, "What every government now must do to prevent an uncontrolled collapse of the system." Now, in that paper, are lengthy quotes by my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, who prophetically had prognosed the present collapse of the system. And it proposes very clear measures which have to be taken, which he had coined the 4 laws of Lyndon LaRouche, starting with the Glass-Steagall banking separation law, exactly as Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced it in 1933. It includes bringing back the power of credit generation under the sovereign control of governments and parliaments, and in the United States, the Congress, and it would demand the creation of a new international credit system, like a new Bretton Woods system, which must remedy the underdevelopment of the global South by providing long-range, cheap interest credit, and it must introduce a massive increase in the productivity of the world economic system by focusing on space technology, on fusion energy, and similar things. You can see that all written in this statement, and I would urge all of you to think what institutions in your country this paper must be brought to the attention. Now, obviously, it's an open-ended question. What will come out of this US-China confrontation? And I want to quote an article which was just published by Wang Wen, who is the dean of the Financial Institute of the Zhongyang Financial Institute of the Renmin University in China, in Beijing. And he writes an article with the headline, "Will there be war between the United States and China?" And he says that that question has gained sudden popularity in the social media following this trade war. And he states first clearly that it was never the intention of China to make or regard the United States as an enemy, that, there is also no statement yet from a high-ranking Chinese officials on this trade war. He mentions as a point to say that China does not want to escalate. And on the 17th of January, 3 days before Trump took office, there was a telephone call between Trump and Xi Jinping in which they both expressed a wish to cooperate and hopefulness that this would be possible, provided each one respects the core interest of the other. Then he proceeds to point to the increased military strength of China, that it has 3 aircraft carriers all along the coast, that it has many long-range missiles, that it has 70% of the world drone production, and that the United States could not defeat China in a military conflict, pointing to recent war scenarios by the Rand Corporation and the CSIS think tank, which come to the conclusion the US cannot win, but could suffer a disastrous defeat. And lastly, he quotes that a cartoon went viral in China just now, showing Trump dressed up as the Empress Dowager Cixi, the last ruler of the Qing dynasty, who in 1900 declared war on the 8 most powerful countries at the time. And then a few years later, the Qing dynasty collapsed, in an obvious reference to, that the United States is engaged in many wars around the world. So he ends the article by saying, if it would come to a war between the United States and China, it would end up much worse for the United States than the Korean War. Now, I think, that is just an opinion of a leading think tank person from China, but it points to the factual situation. Much more worrisome even is a leak which was just published by Tucker Carlson, which we tried to confirm before this meeting. We were not yet able to do so, but Carlson cited a recent Pentagon assessment, which basically says that the Pentagon has documents showing that if they would allow Ukraine to launch missiles deep into the territory of Russia, this would entail a 50% risk for an escalation to nuclear war. And yet that permission was given to Ukraine. And Tucker Carlson basically says that if that, that the policymakers who feel comfortable with such an outcome should belong in a prison for the criminally insane. Now, obviously, we will try to confirm if such a Pentagon document exists, but I do not at all rule it out, because that is what our independent assessment was of the situation towards the end of the Biden administration, and this Pentagon statement would just confirm that. Now, also, otherwise, I think the situation is very dramatic. The IDF in Gaza is pounding several places in Gaza. The humanitarian situation is catastrophic. Smotrich had said that they will not allow one corn of grain to arrive in Gaza anymore, which obviously means total starvation. Even retired IDF soldiers apparently were protesting against Netanyahu, and the UN Security Council issued a condemning statement of the present Israeli policy. So this is ready to go, and obviously the escalation with Iran is still high on the agenda. That has the potential of really bringing the world again to the edge of a global confrontation. And on the other major front, the situation on the ground in Ukraine becomes more desperate by the hour. Complete, devastation. The army is not capable of refilling its ranks. And, there were some high-ranking commanders saying they cannot tell the Ukrainian population the truth because they couldn't take it. There is the Ukraine contact group, again, meeting in Brussels right now, and Witkov is in St. Petersburg. So these are some of the parameters of the extremely traumatic situation. In the meantime, I should mention there was this very important revelation by the New York Times, who on the 31st of January published a 13,000 words long article, basically admitting that from mid-April 22 onward, the entire command of the Ukraine war was conducted out of Wiesbaden, the clay barracks, where basically the US, gave the orders, provided the technical assistance, all the security and intelligence. So, therefore, the argument, that the war was unprovoked and, that it was a war between Russia and Ukraine, which we always said, no, this was a war between the United States and NATO and Russia, that has now been totally confirmed. And I think the decent thing would be that all the people who repeated the narrative about the unprovoked war of aggression should come out and acknowledge that the New York Times, among others, has proven that that was a wrong narrative. Now, talking about a wrong narrative, the German new government, they are not quite yet formed, but they have concluded a coalition treaty between the CDU, CSU, and the Social Democrats. And that treaty contains the unbelievable paragraph that from now on, when this government will be in office, they will try to put through a law forbidding what? Lying. simple lying, that it will be put under punishment if somebody consciously spreads misinformation. So that even Bild Zeitung, the biggest tabloid in Germany, today has an editorial commenting on this news, saying that they should stop this. This is very dangerous. And then there are many legal experts, constitutional legal experts and others quoted saying this is on the way to a dictatorship, because who should decide what is a lie and what not? And many lies, or what was thought to be lies, turns out to be true in a short period afterwards. So they warn against that, saying this is the road to a dictatorship. And I think that that is unfortunately a big danger, given the fact that the editor of a magazine in Germany was condemned already to jail punishment, not to be carried out immediately, but as a pending punishment, because he made a picture of the Interior Minister Faeser showing a poster saying that she is against free speech. A satirical comment, which obviously is not allowed in Germany anymore. So I think we are in an incredible situation, which really demands the mobilization of the international peace movement and the peace coalition, but also any other group which is concerned about world peace. And I have said for several years now that I do not think that this situation can be remedied by simply putting cosmetic beauty band-aids on the problems, but that we have to have a fundamental correction of a flawed system by creating an international security and development architecture, which must take into account the interest of every single country in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia. So we should discuss this in the course of this discussion. And I give the word back to you, Anastasia.
Thank you, Helga. No, we have a very excellent lineup today to go through these very topics that you've brought up. So thank you for giving us this overview today. And I think in particular, what we're seeing in Israel was telling with the previous meetings we've had with the various activists who got on from Israel, who discussed what they're actually seeing on the ground. So this is very interesting developing process. I just wanted to make note of that. Well, I'd like to continue on to the discussion. Next, we have a very good friend of ours of the International Peace Coalition, Graham Fuller, who is a former U.S. diplomat, CIA official, and Islamic scholar. And it is wonderful to have you on today, Graham. Please go ahead. Oh, did we lose you?
No, he's there. Graham, you need to turn your microphone on, please. Unmute.
That's okay.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you, Dennis.
Yep.
Yeah, I was asked to address the very complicated and very disturbing issue that Helga just referred to, among many disturbing issues, namely the equation of war versus no war with Iran. That has been subtly shifting over some period of time. But in the short time I would just like to perhaps address, on the one hand, the arguments in favor of believing that there will be war between Iran and the United States and Israel, on the other hand, and the arguments that might persuade us to think that in the end, perhaps there might not be a war. First of all, I think we are all very vividly aware of the massive buildup of American military forces out in the Pacific region, which are more than powerful enough to deliver devastating attacks against Iran, should that decision be made. The force is present. It's not on the way. It's there. And the threat, the intimidation power to Iran, I think, is quite considerable. Secondly, I think we've all known for a very long time that this kind of a war, especially between the United States and Iran, is dear to Netanyahu's heart. This is one of his major goals. is to multiply Israeli forces and power by joining with the United States in a way that would absolutely devastate Iran beyond anything that Israel could do on its own. We have strong statements out of Iran, naturally enough, that they will refuse to be bullied. They have said that they would not even engage in direct discussions with the United States, although that seems to have softened a bit in the last few days when there has been possibly a tentative agreement that if the first encounters between Witkoff and the Iranian foreign minister Araghchi, if those go well, they might consider moving over to direct negotiations. So that would be possible progress. But as of now, Iran stands very firm, and not surprisingly, that they simply will not be bullied. They're very mindful of how Western power, and especially the UK, has been involved in intervention in Iran over the years, including the overthrow of one of Iran's most important national heroic figures, namely the former prime minister, who was overthrown by a joint UK-CIA revolution, or coup d'etat, I should say, in 1953, Mohammad Mossadegh. We all know that war is seen to unite countries. That might be an attempt might be a temptation for Israel, and particularly Netanyahu, who is otherwise in considerable domestic trouble, might tempt him to want to move towards the war scenario. And who knows, if Trump feels he's under sufficient other pressures on tariffs and other issues, that he could move in that direction. Furthermore, and very importantly, there's the broad perception now in Israel and the United States, and probably reasonably accurately so, that Iran is weaker militarily speaking than it has been for a very long time. We know that through Israeli decapitation efforts to take down Hamas, to take down Hezbollah leadership, and to open up a flight path across Syria and into Iran, was accomplished some time back, so that Iran is more defenseless. I don't want to say defenseless entirely, but more defenseless perhaps than it has ever been in a very long time. So that is tempting, I think, and particularly in the Israeli narrative. And Congress, the US Congress, cannot be relied upon at all to oppose war. If anything, Congress is in the pay of the Israeli Zionist lobby and would be very supportive of an attack against Iran. So those are disturbing factors that argue for the high likelihood of a war with Iran in the upcoming weeks. Now, let's look at the other side of the coin, which would be what indications and indicators might there be that we could avoid a war with Iran on the one hand, and the US and Israel on the other. First of all, I think there's a very interesting new dynamic going on between Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump. I think everybody has always said, oh, well, Donald Trump is in the hands of the Zionists, and all this money, $100 million contribution from Miriam Adelson, who's the biggest voice and financial supporter of Israel in the United States. With all of this, that Trump certainly bows to the Israeli lobby. I think there's some pushback there. For one thing, Trump just snapped back the other day when somebody asked him about war and mentioned that, well, also Israel would be pushing for that. Trump, I don't remember his exact words, but basically said, look, I make the policy, nobody else. So a clear rebuttal, an angered rebuttal, that to suggest that Israel might be pulling the strings of American foreign policy. Secondly, Bibi has now been present twice in the White House, I think probably summoned to the White House to be given news that was not entirely welcome to him and maybe came as a shock. One was when Trump was talking about the future of Gaza. He said, well, the United States is basically going to take Gaza over so that we can turn it into this beautiful new Riviera. I think Bibi Netanyahu thought that Gaza was part of Israel rather than something that the United States would take over. But more important was when Bibi again, I believe, was asked to come to the White House or wanted to come to the White House to push his war with Iran agenda. That was the occasion in which Trump quite explicitly said that there were going to be talks between Iran and the United States. That is not what Bibi wanted to hear at all. On the contrary, I think he wanted reassurance that there was a rock solid commitment on the part of Washington to some kind of lead up to war. I've come to develop some sense of confidence in the person of Stephen Witkoff. Initially, we were all told that this is, a New York developer and no experience in foreign policy whatsoever. Both are true, but in listening to him talk in various interviews, I've gotten the sense of a guy who, yes, may be very tough, but also who is sensitive to the vibes coming from the people he's dealing with. I guess if you're a successful negotiator in New York City real estate, you've got to have some feel for what the other side wants or what the other side seeks if you want to complete a deal. So I think this guy is beginning to show those skills in reaching out. Now he's now been appointed and been involved in Iranian affairs as well as in the Ukraine developments and possibly some other issues as well. So Trump clearly has great confidence in his ability as a negotiator. There is the charge made that Witkoff has no foreign policy experience and doesn't know anything about the world. Well, maybe. I'm not so sure I have great confidence in so-called global expertise foreign policy. The so-called great expertise in US foreign policy has led us to disaster after disaster after disaster in lost wars and mistakes across the world. So the so-called experts do not have a very good record to show for themselves. And I assume that Witkoff is a quick study and is learning what some of the realities of these cultures are. I would mention also that if there is war with Iran between the United States and Iran, this is going to really put an end to the Ukrainian negotiations, which is something close to Trump's heart. I don't think he wants to see that collapse, but it's almost guaranteed that it would come to an end if it fails. I don't think any of the Gulf states want war. I don't think they see any benefit in this. The United States has been trying to create hostility and enmity between the Gulf states and Iran for decades now to promote US military presence in the region. But China helped eliminate that by bringing about this remarkable rapprochement a year or so ago between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So I think Israel has many reasons now to be less confident about what it would face if it turned to war. And finally, I would just like to mention one last issue, which has not been discussed really at all in the complex Middle East geopolitical situation, and that is the role of Turkey. Turkey has long, as we know, long been a NATO member. Was long described as a great loyal NATO ally. That's all gone. Turkey has very much been in this game for itself, playing very skillful diplomatic games and arrangements. It has declared itself as a major regional player in the Central Asia, the Caucasus, in the Mediterranean, Middle East, etc. So Turkey now is very active in Syria. And as we see Iran pushing its weight deeper and deeper into Syria, I think there's a high likelihood that there is going to be some kind of confrontation and clash between Turkey and Israel. And Turkish military is quite formidable, quite skilled and practiced. And I doubt that Israel would wish to tangle with it. But I think the chances of that kind of a problem now coming up is greater than ever, which it will be considerable pushback to Israeli global and regional ambitions. So in the end, I think, to me, and it's a very personal judgment that it could be very well wrong, to me, the hope that the factors weighing against a war with Iran in the near future are considerably stronger than the factors pushing towards war with Iran. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham, for that very thorough analysis. And also for going through, especially this connection and how these negotiation process would work on these multiple fronts. People like to think of them compartmentalized, and that's just not the case. We're working in a global environment. This is not isolated. So thank you very much for that, Graham. So we're going to continue our discussion, and then we'll come back to more questions from the audience. Because I'm sure things are already coming up with people. But next we have, for the first time, I want to welcome Professor Jeffrey Roberts, who is Emeritus Professor of History at the University College Cork, Ireland, and a member of the Royal Irish Academy. And thank you so much for joining us, Professor Robert. It's wonderful to have you on. Please go ahead.
Well, thanks very much for the invitation. It was suggested to me I might want to talk about the Yalta Conference, 1945 Yalta Conference, which I will do. But before that, yeah, I'd just like to say I agree with Graham's appreciation of Stephen Witkoff. Yeah, strikes me as someone who does have a grasp of realities, and most important, seems to have an ability to see different points of view, yeah, to understand different points of view. Most important thing in the kind of present time, I think. And one of the things that strikes me about the immediate kind of like crisis that's presented towards us, which is the tariffs and the trade war and the Chinese United States confrontation, is the complete kind of like incomprehension about what the different points of view are, what the interests at states, lack of communication about the whole thing. It's all about, all the discussion about it in the media, for example, is all about maneuvering for advantage and what tactics can to be deployed. You have to work very hard to find out what the rationale behind the Trump policy is, on the one hand, and also what the rational counter arguments are to that policy. Okay, so in relation to Yalta, okay, so this year is the 80th anniversary of the Yalta conference, and in connection with the anniversary, there's been a fair bit of commentary about it, mostly in connection with the idea that what occurred at Yalta 80 years ago was some kind of spheres of influence carve up of the great powers, which then led almost naturally onto the Cold War. Well, just recently, I took part in a conference discussion about Yalta. It was a conference that was actually held in Yalta at the Livadia Palace, which was the conference venue. I wasn't able to take part in the conference personally, so I did it on Zoom. But actually, I have actually been to Livadia Palace before. Anyway, I mean, the main point I made in my presentation was this: is that Yalta had nothing to do with spheres of influence, but it had everything to do with great power unity, and everything to do with trying to create a new international security architecture, which would actually lead to a durable peace. That's what Yalta what was all about. Obviously, it was a discussion between the great powers, yeah. So, you know, the peace that was envisaged at Yalta between Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union was a great power-based peace. It was a global order in which they would be the dominant force, but nevertheless, it was a peace which all states were expected to benefit from in terms of their security and in terms of their prosperity. So the concept was a benign great power peace. That was the idea. But of course, what happened was that that project collapsed. It collapsed quite quickly after the Second World War, when you had the development of the Cold War. Now, you know, the thing about the Grand Alliance and this peacetime Grand Alliance project, the most important thing from my perspective, what I would like to make, is that, you know, the Grand Alliance of the Second World War was created as a matter of political choice. Yeah, it was willed into action, and it was sustained through four years of war. And the failure of that project to translate itself into the post-war period, that was a failure of political choice as well. That was a result of political decisions made after the Second World War. So quite simply, there could have been a more enduring peacetime Grand Alliance had different political decisions been made in 1945 and thereafter. And actually, there could be a renewed great power concert today as a result of a matter of political choice. And of course, you know, just recently we saw, you know, that kind of like possibility was glimpsed quite dramatically when the Trump administration comes into office and completely upends the principles governing assumptions of US foreign policy, and starts talking about the need for collaboration with Russia, starts talking rapprochement, possibility of détente. And it's quite a radical kind of turnabout, and we're still in the midst of it. But it just shows you what's possible, doesn't it? As a matter of political choice. Now, whether or not that will sustain itself is another question. But there's no reason why it shouldn't be able to sustain itself, right? If it doesn't sustain itself, it won't be because its failure is inevitable. It will be a political failure, just like the failure of the Yalta perspective on a permanent peace. That was a post-Second World War political failure. Yeah. Now, I'd also like to bring into my discussion here a connected but aspect of it, which is to refer you to the work of an American historian called Paul Schroeder, or Schrader, that's how you pronounce his name, Paul Schrader. Now, Paul Schrader, he was a specialist in 19th century European history. And he was a student of what came to be called the Concert of Europe. The Concert of Europe, a great power constellation of power and unity, which sustained general peace in Europe for nearly 100 years between the Napoleonic Wars and the outbreak of the First World War. And Schroeder's perspective on the concept of Europe was that it was a political construction, yeah, and it was something that arose out of the experience of the devastating experience of the Napoleonic Wars. So post-Napoleonic Wars, European political leaders, decide to embrace a peacemaking project in the form of this great power concept. And Schroeder's work is devoted to seeing how that concept worked and why that it ultimately failed. Okay, but the key concept he introduces in his narrative about the history of the concept here is the concept of political equilibrium, and what he meant by that was a common commitment by Europe's great powers to maintain peace and stability by respecting each other's rights, responsibilities, security, status, and interests. So in effect, what happened post the Napoleonic Wars, the great powers exercised or attempted to exercise a benign collective hegemony for the sake of self-interest, of course, but also for the common interests of states. And that benign collective hegemony, okay, as the 19th century moves on, it begins to erode, begins to disintegrate a bit. But nevertheless, it does sustain peace for nearly 100 years. Okay, so let's bring it back today. It seems to me that, okay, we need a new international security structure. Okay, and allied to that, there's a lot of discussion about the emergent multipolar world, the end of Western American global hegemony, and the kind of re-emergence of a system of states based on Westphalia, yeah, the state sovereignty system. Yeah, all very fine. But the reality now is the same as the reality it was in 1945, and also the same reality is in 1815, is that not all states are equal. There are big powers, there are small powers. Some powers exercise more influence than others. So if you're going to have a stable multipolar system, a stable Westphalian system based on state sovereignty, it has to be underpinned by great power collaboration. It has to be underpinned by a great power stability, a great power concert. So that's a reality which I think we have to appreciate. But of course, there can be no renewed great power concept in the absence of peace. Peace is the fundamental precondition for the great powers to actually organize their relationships, yes, to develop their relationships on the basis of mutual restraint and mutual collaboration, which of course is why it's so important that the Ukraine war comes to an end. Why it's so important that the Middle Eastern situation is restrained, and also why it's so important that current American-Chinese differences don't actually develop into some kind of military conflict over Taiwan, because there's something more at stake than just Ukraine or Iran or Gaza or Palestine or China and so on. What's at stake here is the possibility of a future stable, peaceful international order. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Roberts, for that overview and insight into this, really what the agreements were between FDR and Stalin. I think that the Yalta conference is actually important to look back at and how we're moving forward in this process now. So thank you for going through that. We're going to have a couple more introductions or speakers into the dialogue, and then we'll go back to questions. Looks like people are already sending some stuff in. We do have a video statement from Mr. Kodagawa, who is the former official of the Japanese Ministry of Finance. He's been a very important figure in expressing many of the financial problems going on in the world. So we greatly appreciate his input into the discussion today. Can we grab that video, please?
The current problems of the global economy stemmed from the complete mismanagement of the policies of the Western financial supervisory authorities and double standards they applied. It began with the Plaza Accords of September 22nd, 1985. The idea was to eliminate Japan's foreign trade surplus vis-a-vis United States by strengthening the yen through coordinated intervention. Japan at that time can be compared to China today, to which I think Trump targeted with the hike of high tariff. As a result, the value of the yen rose from 235 yen versus dollar to around 150 yen in 1 year. As a result, Japan's manufacturing industry, which had lost its international competitiveness due to soaring labor costs, moved its manufacturing bases to Southeast and China. In addition, Japanese financial institutions used the yen to expand their operation into London, and the interest rate on loans in London was reduced to 1/10 of the previous level in a short period due to competition with Japanese financial institutions, and prominent merchant banks in the United Kingdom went bankrupt. In 1988, the Basel Bank regulation was agreed for the purpose of stopping such Japanese financial institutions from conquering London market. This regulation, which targeted financial institutions in Japan with little capital, was introduced in Japan after the grace period ended in 1993. And financial institutions in Europe and the United States that expanded into Japan and Asia started to cry out the need to dispose of non-performing loans based upon this regulation, causing financial crises in Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, and other countries, and made substantial profits at the sacrifice of Asian countries. At that time, monetary policymakers and bankers were arrested or driven to suicide in Asian countries. At this time, the West demanded three principles: that Asian countries continue mark-to-market accounting, allow short selling, and resolve the resolution of financial institutions. When the Lehman shock occurred in 2008, financial supervisory authorities in Europe and the United States not only bailed out financial institutions using taxpayers' money, but also bailed out manufacturing companies such as GM. It is the exact opposite of the harsh response demanded of Asian countries, and it was a complete double standard. The three demands for Asian countries were met in exact opposite ways, including by the IMF. That is, mark-to-market accounting was suspended, short selling was prohibited, and financial institutions were bailed out. And no one responsible for the collapse was punished. As a result, the moral hazard of financial institution managers could not be suppressed at all. On the contrary, financial supervisors in Europe and the United States have tried to hide their dire financial situations by providing large amounts of liquidity to financial institutions using quantitative easing, devised by the Bank of Japan in 2000. However, since Europe and the United States, which had outsourced manufacturing, had a shortage of manufacturing to lend to, compared to Asia, this excess liquidity did not stimulate the real economy, and it was used for unprovoked stock prices in the United States and astronomical derivative trading in Europe and the United States. In addition, companies like BlackRock have used excess liquidity to acquire hard-earned companies from Asian countries through acquisitions. Western bankers have indulged in gambling type of transactions stimulated by the moral hazard. Such financial capitalism ends up with the further disparity of wealth between the rich and the poor, which is on the contrary to real economy capitalism that should have narrowed down such disparity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kodogawa, for sending that in. Can we please edit this video here? I neglected to mention that not only was Mr. Kodogawa a former official Japanese in the Japanese financial ministry, but he also was the executive director for Japan of the IMF, which I think, given what he said today, it's very, very important coming from someone of his caliber. So thank you very much, Mr. Kodogawa, for that. So we're going to continue with the dialogue, and I just want to check that we have, there we go. Yeah, we have a report from Daniel Burke, who is an organizer of the Schiller Institute in the New York City area. And as we've been seeing over the past 3 weeks now, just a lot of organizing going on to campuses. And it is just wonderful to get an overview of what's been going on and talking to young people. So please go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you, Anastasia. I'll keep it brief, but I'd like to, really communicate to people that now is the time to contact everyone that you know who is younger, any students that you know, and ensure that they hear about, oh shoot.
Oh, did we lose Daniel? Okay, well, we'll just give him a second here. I mean, I can just say, just to kind of fill in while we're pulling Daniel back in, but it's been very exciting just listening. I'm actually in New York City right now and talking with Jose and others. The work that they've been doing, going to the various campuses and the community college in the Bronx, the Manhattan Community College. They've been bringing in 25, 50 contacts at a time of students who are signing up, wanting to know more about how they can get involved and active in doing what we're doing. So it's very exciting. And I see we have Daniel back on, so please continue.
Okay, I apologize for that. Something wrong with my computer. So here I am on my phone. Anyway, I mean, we've been on perhaps 6, 7 different campuses over the past 6 weeks in various forms as the LaRouche movement. But what we're moving people towards is the Schiller Institute conference taking place May 24th and 25th in the New York City area, which people can register for on our website, schillerinstitute.com. And what we do is we go out there, and our intention is to bring young people onto the stage of history. There is clearly a crucial moment of transition for the world today, and we're raising the subjective question: what will you do about it? What choices will you make to bring about an era of mutual benefit, respect, and age of reason? So what we do is we bring out this beautiful big sign with an image of the World Land Bridge, the proposal of Lyndon and Helga LaRouche, that goes back to the early 1990s for global infrastructure and development. And I say to the young person who stops, what do you want the world to look like 50 years from now? And then I hear from them, do you want us to, do you think we should eradicate poverty everywhere? Do you think that we should, bring the benefits of science and technology to every country? Do you think that we should end the danger of world war? And naturally, everyone agrees with that. Those who don't, we have a different discussion. We try to bring them into alignment with that. But many young people are thinking about this. We meet them all the time, and then we pose to them a central issue, which I think is crucial for everyone to consider, namely, is it the nature of man that he is made to live in harmony with his brothers? Or is it the case that the human species is destined to be in a state of eternal warfare amongst one another? And when we let that question kind of hang in the air and demonstrate that this is, if we don't answer that question as a United States, as the West, as individuals, then how will we possibly be able to see this future that we all want to see in 50 years? We let that sink in, and then we bring to the fore certain crucial policies that can be put forward to handle this. But in a deeper sense, what we're calling on people to do is to recognize across the world, you have a new principle of cooperative development that is in motion. We show them our pamphlet, which goes through 151 countries are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. It goes through the role of the BRICS countries, which now represent 75% of the world's coal production and steel production, if you include all BRICS members and partners. And we show them the world is not what it looks like from within the United States. There's a different historical process that is happening all around you, and you may not even notice it. And it's on that basis, as in the support that we've received for these conferences from former Foreign Minister of South Africa, Dr. Naledi Pandor. It's within that context of a global pursuit of a new and just order that we need to create the capability that is not yet thoroughly organized in the United States and Europe and across the West, in which a capability to catalyze the change required, to catalyze a change in this direction of reaching out a hand of friendship to the global South with specific, clear, functioning policies as have been formulated by Lyndon LaRouche and his associates over these years for the total economic development of mankind. And so that is what we're calling people to join us into, to have a vanguard of youth who will stand for this and that give the older generation the confidence that this could be brought forward and bring that motion into effect immediately toward the necessary solutions. So there's much more I could say about it. I guess I'll just finally comment that every time we go out there, we meet people from the BRICS countries who are first, second generation immigrants, some of them on a student visa. Many of the people on a student visa are more courageous than you would expect, given the great threats to their security that have been introduced by the US government, as in the recent abduction of number of students as for example, Ozturk from Tufts University. But every time we go out, we meet people from around the world who have a different perspective, and we meet young people who are optimistic and who seek a better world, and we are bringing them into this mission. So our goal is to really bring that together within 6 weeks for this conference as a more powerful political capability, Renaissance capability, devoted to the good, than we have ever had before, or that we really require at this moment, I should say. And that's what I'd ask you all to participate in and ensure that everyone you know who fits that characteristic, who's young and optimistic and seeking some way to do something about this situation, that you put them in touch with us and get them to our conference. Thank you.
That's excellent, Daniel. I don't know if you were able, I know just for security reasons, we don't want to post all the pictures that we have of the various people in there. But if you are able to pull some pictures together, we can show that during the discussion period. And I think that would be very fun for people to see. But this is an excellent example of the type of work that other people on this discussion can do. You can reach out to us about, the posters that you described. I'm sure we can send over something that people can use like that to inspire some young people. But clearly there is something in the air that people are smelling, or they can sense that they want to take action and do something. Just the response that you're getting and what we're hearing is very, very exciting. So thank you for that, Daniel, and for going through that. So I want to just come back to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and see if you have a response to anything that's been said thus far before we kick off the general discussion.
Well, I just want to thank both Mr. Fuller for his optimism, which I think is giving us a hopeful perspective. I have my doubts if it can go through, but I'm happy to hear that from you. And I want to thank Professor Roberts for actually picking up on the question of a new security architecture, because I think the discussion of how to get there and what should be the principles of such a new architecture is, in my view, extremely important. However, I would say we need something better than both Yalta and also the 100 years of peace between the Congress of Vienna and the First World War, because that was, it was sort of a peace, but, it was still not, I mean, the efforts to develop Republican principles in Germany, for example, failed in 1848, and you had basically still various forms of oligarchical systems. So I think we need something better, and I would suggest that we really have to start a discussion about what should be the principles of this new architecture. I have written 10 principles which are attempting to touch upon what I think is absolutely crucial to add to such ideas like the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence or the UN Charter, which I think must play a role in the new architecture. But I think it needs something what you could call almost a metaphysical basis, or if you don't want to call it metaphysical, pertaining to the actual lawfulness of the physical universe, to give some sort of anchoring, in something which is not opinion, but which is based on science and principles of great art. I, however, think it would be important to really think, I think the new element in the situation is the fact that the global South countries want to have an equal voice. That's why I'm not, on the one side, you need the great powers to, guarantee it with all their power and military might. But I think what is called for is an order which gives an equal voice to all countries, be them small or great. And I think the BRICS countries have been moving in this direction, trying to apply these principles. But as I said, I just want to express my happiness that this discussion has been brought by you on the table again. So maybe, you know, we could encourage some young people, some students to start thinking about, you know, what should be the principles of the new world economic and architecture, because, you know, the world we are trying to shape for a durable survivability of humanity will be largely the world you are going to inhabit for the next 75 years or more. So I think you have to have a voice in that. So that would be my appeal to younger people as well.
Thank you, Helga. I want to, well, one, I just want to check in on Graham. What's your timetable? Are you able to stick around for discussion? You're muted, my friend.
Yeah, I probably about half hour.
Okay. Well, I wanted to get a response also from both yourself, Graham Fuller, and also Professor Roberts to anything in the discussion thus far before we continue to the audience. If you don't, that's totally fine.
No, I'm fine for now. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a response at all, Professor Roberts? Oh, you're muted, my friend.
Yeah, I was, yeah, I agree with Helga that obviously you just can't, recreate, the concert of Europe or the Vienna system or Yalta or anything like that in the present. You know, it, its political equilibrium would be a global political equilibrium, and obviously it would encompass all kinds of different states and the global south. And also you need an institutional basis for it, don't you? And one of the key institutional basis of it will obviously be the continuation and development of the United Nations, but there are other bases as well. BRICS, I think, is a very interesting example, developing example of how political equilibrium can actually operate. But I think the fundamental point I'd make, and actually, yes, I mean, my main topic of research at the moment actually is the history of the peace movement. So I was very interested in your discussion here. I mean, the peace movement I'm dealing with is the World Peace Council, 1940s, 50s, and 60s. So really interested in that. But one of the things about the peace movement I'm dealing with, the World Peace Council part of the peace movement, was that they always insisted on the centrality of state action in creating global peace. Yeah, that you had to actually work through states. Yes, change state policy. Yeah, it has to be an intergovernmental process work here. Yeah, you build a global infrastructure of peace through citizen action. Yes, through development of a global civil society dedicated to peace. But you also need to have this state level of engagement and interaction and a construction of a system of peace internationally. So I think dealing with states and the reality of states and their different levels of power, their different ideologies and all this kind of that's the reality you cannot escape if you're involved in a peacemaking project.
Excellent. Thank you, Professor Roberts. I think, I mean, this is generally an excellent place to have these kinds of discussions, this forum in particular, and we regularly have on, former presidents of nations and officials of countries, as you've seen so far, as in like Kodagawa. But I want to, we're going to make a transition just into the Q&A portion. But before we go into that, I'm going to make a general announcement to everybody on here. One, please check in the chat to get the RSVP link for the in-person conference for May 24th, 25th. We would love to see you and have you participate in the dialogue. That link is in the chat on Zoom, or you can go to schillerinstitute.com and find that RSVP link there. Also, before we go into the discussion period, if you like to be part of the dialogue with the panelists today, you must be registered. If you go to schillerinstitute.com, register at the link on the top. It's one of the rotating links. Select that, sign up, and we will send you the Zoom link, and you can hop on. But with that, please just let me know.
Perhaps it would be appropriate before we make that.
Oh.
Yeah, I would just like to make one or two comments
Go ahead.
Both related to what Daisuke Koregawa had to say earlier, plus give people a little bit of an update on some breaking developments from yesterday and today, which are financial and strategic at the same time. People should realize that Dr. or Professor Koregawa was not only a high-level official in the Japanese finance ministry many years ago, but he was also Japan's representative, executive director before the International Monetary Fund. Now, don't be confused by being a representative to the fund and sharing the views of the fund. It's not the same thing. There are many such examples of that. Many of these type of people have to kind of serve behind enemy lines, to put it bluntly. But Daisuke Kotegawa has been very forthright and explicit about the kind of problems that led to the blowout of Japan around the accords at the time and the Asian economy and so on and so forth. And this is a very valuable lesson for the situation that we have today. Now, I just received this morning an update, which I think is very relevant to what Helga was talking about in her opening remarks. I mean, Helga told us one thing which was totally shocking but not surprising, which was this report, still to be confirmed, of a Pentagon study which said if we provide long-range missiles to the Ukrainians, we've got a 50-50 chance of nuclear war. Now, that's shocking. It's not surprising because it's exactly what the International Peace Coalition warned about. 50-50, that's like flipping a coin. Are you kidding? But there's also, in the same fashion, shocking but not surprising revelations from the London Economist magazine, printed yesterday, about what actually happened this week, which is they have an article which says that the world system was at the brink of a blowout on Tuesday, and that we pulled back from the brink, but barely, and the problem is not solved. Now, you know, the London Economist, these guys are very forthright. They figure it's okay to say what's actually going on because no one's going to ever challenge them in the final analysis. Let me read you a few quotes. This is from The Economist. The headline is, America's financial system came close to the brink, close quote, on Tuesday. And it explains that the failure of both risky stocks and supposedly safe assets, the treasuries, at once threatened to destabilize the financial system itself, close quote. They mentioned Trump's announcement of tariffs, and they said even though he put on a pause, quote, turbulence may well return. Should trading seize up once again, the Fed would have to intervene, acting as buyer of last resort and offering emergency loans to systemically important firms in need, close quote. Now, where have you heard that before? Like 2008. Where after the Lehman crisis, the entire world financial system was this far from a total blowout, and it was massive quantitative easing and pumping of funny money into the system that kept the speculative bubble afloat, fed the speculative cancer to the detriment of the entire world economy. Now we're in much worse shape because although the speculative bubble back then was merely a quadrillion and a half, today it's over $2 quadrillion. So back to The Economist, they say this whole situation, if the Fed were to jump in and bail everybody out, this might cause further turmoil because it may well be there's a loss of faith by investors overall. And therefore, we run the risk of systemic damage. It would be reckless to assume the shocks are over. How much more can the system take before something really does break? Close quote. Now, followers of the Schiller Institute and the IPC will not find this surprising, but they should find it shocking because it's an open statement of what we have been saying all along. We are at the edge, both of a thermonuclear war, thank you, Joe Biden, and we remain at the edge of a total blowout, the equivalent in finance of a thermonuclear explosion with all of the attendant dangers. Now, The British, of course, do have a solution. The same day, Gordon Brown published an op-ed in The Guardian where he said we need an economic coalition of the willing. And he describes that as a synchronized reduction in interest rates, an initiative the US might well join, backed by fiscal activism. And he said, we have to create a, quote, Europe-wide off-balance sheet, repeat, off-balance sheet, special purpose defense and security fund. In other words, let it rip. Don't count it anymore. Just let it rip. We've got to bail this out somehow. A quadrillion? Sure. 2 quadrillion? Why not? What's the difference? And that's the game plan here. So I think that the lessons of this recent period, this crisis was not caused by tariffs. That was foolish, stupid, dangerous, misguided, any word you want to use, for Trump taking the advice of quacks like Stephen Miron with his proposal of let's try to blow out the system a little bit anyway. Let's have controlled disintegration. But that's not what caused the problem. That was lighting the match. But the tinderbox, the room full of dynamite, is what Lyndon LaRouche has always said it was, and which Helga Zepp-LaRouche addressed in her call for 10 principles to address the need for a new security architecture. Descriptions of problems are important, but only for the purpose of coming up with solutions. And I want to go back to just to remind people, sharing screen here, with what Helga had mentioned to you at the beginning. There we go. The new statement, which has been put out by the Schiller Institute, which is called What Each and Every Nation Must Do Now. Wall Street gave us this crisis. LaRouche has the solution. And it goes through in some detail. I'm sure we'll provide a link so that people can download it. This is a leaflet, a 3-page leaflet, both a description of the crisis and LaRouche's proposed solutions. This is the over 2 quadrillion world financial aggregates, mainly derivatives, which we're talking about. That's the explosive charge. There is no solution unless you put this entire system through bankruptcy reorganization and then issue new credits for the purpose of development. This is LaRouche's triple curve, where he explains that the problem in economics is not simply the growth of monetary and financial aggregates, but the collapse of the physical economy. And it does no good whatsoever to piddle around with the financial side if you are not going to guarantee rapid growths in physical economic productivity through advances in technology, advances in science, and through great projects. Exactly what we have proposed repeatedly in terms of the OASIS plan for Southwest Asia. But that's just a model for the entire world. And here, if you can see it, is our proposal for a world land bridge network for the kinds of projects, infrastructure projects, development projects, led by fusion, led by space exploration, which is the perfect basis of cooperation among nations that would otherwise be at each other's throats. And I think that this element of cooperation around this kind of a new world vision, the world 50 years from now, the world that the youth need to create, is exactly the basis for what Professor Roberts and Helga have been discussing about, okay, what is the nature? What are the principles behind this new order that we have to urgently create? But my point in this is we are at the brink. We were at the brink. We remain at the brink. People have got to get in motion. Come to the May 24th, 25th Schiller Institute conference. Help get youth involved, as Daniel is saying, and bring more people to these IPC meetings.
Great. So I posted the link again in the chat for people to find it on Zoom. And you can find it if you're on another platform at schillerinstitute.com. It's actually the very first item on the website. So please go ahead and check that out. Okay. So I think with that, we're going to continue into the discussion period, correct? Okay, great. All right. So Jose, just let me know when we cut the stream.